let's get started and see if I can remember how to do this. Okay, let me see if I can get the camera over here. Okay, so my tub of water is over here. My computer is over here. I'm not going to be able to see questions for a while. So hold off on your questions until I'm done cleaning, because otherwise they'll scroll up and then I'll lose them. So hold off on questions for a little bit here. But here's my tub of water. And I need my Optivisor so I can see. And so this is basically kind of like cleaning porcelain, except it's not been soft fired. So I'm going to start with an upper leg. And I believe this is, I think this is the, let me see if there's any marking on this thing. Right here it is, but I think it's too faint. I can't read it. I think this is the 440, hold on, let me look here. I think this is the Byron 447 body. Yeah, I think this is the 447. So I'm pretty sure that's what it is. Okay, I'm going to start with an upper leg until I remember what I'm doing here. So basically, I'm going to stick it in the water and get it wet, but I'm only going to leave it in there for a few minutes. But see how dark of a color it turns? Let's see if I can move this out of the way a little bit so I got a little more room here. And as I use the tools, they need to be wet. But just that little bit of soaking you do, it, oh, wait a minute. I got to get this more over here. Okay. So I need to keep cleaning my knife off in the bucket of water, but I can take my scalpel and that seam line comes off really good. Okay, I'm going to wet it again. But remember, I'm not leaving this in the water. This isn't like porcelain. I can't, but you can feel, you know, this is like to get this little bit thicker seam line off that's here. I mean, it takes a little bit of oomph to do it. You can feel that it's kind of like rubbery. It's not like porcelain. I mean, I could bang this stuff around, and if I drop it on a cement floor, it's going to break. But otherwise, it's actually almost like rubbery. But if you leave it in the water, if you put it in the water and then walk off and leave it, you're going to come back to nothing. It will eventually disintegrate. Okay, so that seam line came off pretty good. So then I've got an old worn out, you know, bisque scrubber. You know, it's just a 220 grit scrubber, but this is a pretty worn out one. I'm going to get that wet, wring out the extra water, but then I'm going to use that and a circular motion, and that will take that seam line right off of there. And so just using this worn out grit scrubber, you don't want one that's got all the grit on it. This is one that got used for a million other things before I turned it into the scrubber for cleaning CompoBell. But you would basically use this and clean it kind of like you're cleaning soft fire greenware. It's going to be a little bit harder than soft fire greenware is. And you can definitely feel this is like a rubbery type thing. But it cleans really easy compared to Sealy's latex compo. That stuff is awful. As far as ease of cleaning, you've basically got to use like a, you know, electric sander on it to take the seam lines off, where this It may take a little bit of work, but it's actually quite easy. Okay, so I've got top part all done. Now I had this seam line right around here. I'm going to take that off. And then basically this piece is about done. You know, this was a really easy piece to do. There's no in and outs and, you know, fingers and toes and all of that. So now you can't get, you've got all of this like paste like stuff on there. Yes, Paula, you use the same molds that you would use for porcelain. And with CompoBell, if you clean them up good enough in between, you can use them for both porcelain and composition. Sealy's latex compo is very hard on the molds, and you really can't switch back and forth between composition and porcelain. With the Sealy's latex compo, you need to have a separate set of molds that you're going to use strictly for composition. It's not a good idea to try and switch them back and forth. Okay, so then you need, but the CompoBell, if you clean them up really good, you can use it one time for porcelain and another time for CompoBell, but it does take some cleaning to make sure it's, you know, totally clean. Okay, so now I have like what would have been all this dust. Okay, Paula, I've got to quit looking at questions until I get done here. So I'll be back with that. But no, I think you just basically clean it out with a sponge and water. I'll have to ask Deli, but I think it totally cleans with like a sponge and water. Okay, so now I have these, I don't know what they're called. They're like a ceramic sponge. And I've got to remove all of this dust. You know, if it wasn't wet, it would be dust, but it's all this paste. And so I have to keep rinsing my sponge out. I need to keep wiping my hand off, but you want to get all of that paste-like stuff off of there. And so it may take a couple of times of rinsing out your sponge and getting all that excess goop off of there. But if I get my hand cleaned here to where I don't have stuff all over my hand, then I can eventually get all of this paste off of here. You know, if this was regular greenware, it would be dust. But since this is wet, it's more like a paste. Now, if I had, well, I can use this towel. I'm just going to, there's a little bit of the paste-like stuff on it. But if I clean this with that sponge, because my hand's wet and it kind of keeps getting it dirty, I can take and wipe this on this dry towel, and the piece is totally clean then. All the residue is off of it, and I can set this down to air dry, and it is ready to paint then. And that's all that needs to be done to that piece. Okay, same thing. Let's go with the foot now. So I'm just going to give it a little bit of a soak. Paula, I think all my husband does is take one of these sponges and wipes out the mold with water. But you can't do that with Sealy's latex compo. You really can't switch back and forth between compo and porcelain. Okay, so same thing. I'm going to take the seam line off. And then the stuff that accumulates on the knife, I'm just putting in the water. It also is advised, like when I dump this tub of water, you really should take it outside and dump it and not pour it down your plumbing. It could eventually clog up your sink, maybe. Now, I will admit up here, I do dump it down the sink, and I have never had a problem with it. But they do recommend not putting it through your plumbing. But up here, I'm on a second floor. It's too difficult to, I can't carry it up and down the steps. Okay. And I've never had a problem with it. I just run the water and get it all running through. It's just a clay-based stuff. There's nothing really that harmful in it. I mean, I'm not going to drink the water or anything, but there's nothing that hazardous in this. Okay. So I'm using the very worn out grit scrubber, which is taking off the seam line. Like I said, this is a pretty clean mold. I'm not having much trouble at all removing the seam lines on. I'm pretty sure this is the B447 body, the Byron 447, and it's a really clean mold. It doesn't have a lot of work on it. Okay, so I'm just cleaning it like I would clean a regular piece of greenware. But I'm cleaning with, you know, this worn out grit scrubber. You just want to get it as smooth as you can, because once you paint over it, as long as you've got your seam lines off and all of that, it will spray paint really smooth. Denley's actually very good at using the sprayer, so his paint jobs come out pretty good. Takes a couple of coats of, which I think that was a question somebody had asked me, and I forgot where it was. We use Bell's CompoBell paint, which is a latex paint which washes out really easy, and he just puts that in the sprayer and sprays it. They make it in the regular pink flesh color, you know, like the normal bodies would be, and then I think there's a Indian and an Afro color. There's a couple of colors, but all we ever make is just the regular flesh color. So yeah, actually, Melissa, it is, CompoBell is actually very easy to use. Like I say, it does have the drawback that smaller bodies that are poured pretty thin, sometimes they will crack when you're trying to string them. But for the bigger ones that are poured thicker, I don't have that much problem with them. And like I say, what I found with the CompoBell is it may get like a tiny crack around these openings, but you can fill it in with that, I think it's wood filler is what is in that thing over there. That jar of stuff he uses is some type of a filler. You can fill in the crack, sand it off, repaint it, and then you never know. There was a little tiny crack there, and it just all goes away, and it never, unless there's an extreme amount of stress on it, it never reopens back up. I've never had any trouble with it. It's just the stress of stringing it once in a while will do something. Okay. So this I've pretty well got done. I'm just going to wipe it off. with the towel because my hand's wet, so I just kind of keep putting the paste back on it. But now this piece is totally done and smooth enough that it could be painted. This is actually a really easy body. It's got very few seam lines. You know, the seam lines are very small and not a lot of detail. So this thing is cleaning really good. So, okay, let me show you a hand next. I'll show you how I do the fingers. So this is an AT arm. I wish I had a brew arm poured, but what I had was an AT. Okay, so I dipped it in the water a couple of times. That softened it up enough that the seam line is coming off. So I'm just scraping along the seam line, getting it off of there. Just like if I was cleaning a hand in porcelain. The only difference is these fingers break a lot less easy. You know, these don't break like porcelain fingers do. So I just want to get the worst of the seam line off. Okay, then I can take the knife and just kind of cut some of that seam line off in between the fingers. And I don't have to worry about as much about popping these fingers off. Like I say, it's pretty sturdy. Just not if you drop it on the cement. Okay, so that's the most of it. So then I can take a nylon, just like I would clean porcelain fingers. This is a little bit harder on, in fact, I can tell Dummy's been using this one while he was cleaning up here because my nylon is full of holes. Trying to show you here. I've got a lot of holes in my nylon, which you have to be careful with because if your finger catches in it, I suppose you could eventually break off a finger trying to do this. But I spread the nylon over my index finger and then pull it with, let me find the camera here. I pull it taut between my thumb and the middle finger, like so. And then I can go in between the fingers. And it's usually, you know, they're not as easy to clean as a porcelain finger would be, but they're not anything like the Sealy's latex compo is. But let me see here. It takes a little bit of cleaning here. And you do wear out the nylons a lot faster than you do on porcelain. But this is the exact way I would clean porcelain fingers, just not as carefully because I worry more about the porcelain fingers popping off. These are going to stay on there pretty good. But you can get those seam lines off pretty good with just an old knee-high nylon. Nope, we must have something going on in town. I hear the sirens. Okay. So I'm just using this nylon to clean in between. Oops, I'm going the wrong way. I need to go this way to get it better in the camera. So I'm just using the nylon to get the worst of the seam lines off. Like I say, this stuff cleans actually really nice. Now, hopefully Becky will be making CompoBell soon. So if anybody wants to get CompoBell on order, let me know and I can order you some. Now, it is like porcelain. You do have to buy 4 gallons. And I'm thinking CompoBell is $35 a gallon. Something like that. I think was what it is 35. Yeah, Paula, when you're cleaning this, things have to be kept wet. You don't want to soak the piece too long or it will disintegrate on you. But I may have to eventually here wet my nylon again. But I'm soon going to, as soon as I get the fingers done, I'm going to switch back to that rubber grit, I'll say this right yet, rubber grit sander. I'll switch to that to do the forearms here. Okay, I think I've pretty well got the seam lines off to where they don't look too bad. Yep, I see a seam line on the little finger yet. I haven't got that side of the little finger. So I'm just, I'm holding the nylon like that, and then I'm rubbing it in between the fingers, and that's taking that seam line off. Okay, then I want to go back to my grit scrubber, and in the larger area here, I'm going to go back to the 220 grit sander. Okay, so I'm just making sure the seam line is off of there. Okay, I think I pretty well got it all the way around. So now the same thing. See, I have all this paste in that all over my hand. So I'm going to take the, and I don't know what they call these things, but they've always been used in ceramics. I don't know if it actually has a name or not. It's just some type of a sponge. And I'm going to wipe off the worst of the paste that's on there. Get all the extra off of the fingers. Like when you're cleaning regular greenware, you would have it in the tub of water or under I always finish off my pieces by running them under the sink. You don't want to do that with the CompoBell. That's too much water. Okay, so I've got the worst of it off with the sponge. And then, like I say, my towel is pretty clean here so far. So I'm just going to wipe the rest of it off here. And I don't have a brush here right now, but if I had just a, let me look over here. Here's one. If I had just the white brush, I could wet that and it would take that dust out from the, in between the fingers. And like if I have a rough spot on the finger, like there's a little bit of a dent there, I could use that brush to take it off. And then go back in and clean the dust off, the paste-like. Okay, I can see some of that paste in between the fingers, so I'm just going to peel that out of there and then dry it off. As long as you get the majority of that paste out of there, your paint will spray on fine, nice and smooth. Okay, so there is the arm all done. Okay, let me show you the body quick. Otherwise, I just have the rest of those pieces there. I've got another upper leg, another lower leg, another hand, and a pair of upper arms. But let's go ahead and we'll do the torso quick. So here's what the body looks like. Hopefully my tub's big enough here. So I'm just going to get it wet. But remember, I don't want to leave it soaking in the water too long. And with the shape of this body, make sure you're getting most of that water out of there. Just so it's not disintegrating it. Okay. So I'm just going to go along and lightly take as much off of the seam line as I can. And then see all of this paste-like, I just keep putting back in the, see now here where I've got a little bit of thickness, I've got a round circle that Donna cut out is inside this body too. It's rattling around in there. This mold's got a little bit of thickness up here. Oop, let me move this back over, you can't see me. Right here. It's like the mold doesn't fit as well together right up here around this neck plug. So the seam is a little bit thicker. So it's a little bit harder to pull that off of there because the seam line is thicker. But here where it has a small seam line, this peels off pretty good. Okay, this is drying out on me a little bit too much. So I'm going to get it wet with the sponge. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to go to the grit scrubber now. That's not dripping wet, but it's got some water on it. And where the seam line was really small, it comes off really easy. When you get down here to where the seam line was a little bit thicker, where the, you know, the way this body mold's made, there's like a big end piece and a big top piece here. And it leaked a little bit, so the seam line's a little bit thicker there. So it takes more cleaning right in here, but it does come off. Once it gets a little bit wetter, you can peel that off a little bit easier. Plus, I'm using a really dull knife here. This knife is just about wore out. But this worn out grit scrubber takes it off fairly easy. Okay, so now I'm going to turn it over. I'm going to re-wet my sponge. It's getting a little bit dry because I need to work on this seam line. Let me see if I can get the camera a little bit better here. Also, the CompoBell doesn't have much of a smell to it. I can smell it a little bit when Denny's pouring it, but I'm not smelling much of anything here as I'm cleaning it. But I can really, you know, I can smell it a little bit when he pours it. The Sealy's Compo, just the latex stuff would run me out of the house. I couldn't stand to be in the house all the way at the other end of the lot. It is really stinky. Okay, so let's work on this seam line here a little bit more. This was where I had the thicker seam line from where the parts fit together. But it's coming off pretty good. Now, there is no shelf life on the CompoBell pieces after they've been poured, because I'm going to tell you, these are pieces I dug out of a tub that were poured about 8 years ago. So the pieces will sit there indefinitely until you get around to cleaning them. I'm not sure what the shelf life is on CompoBell, but I know the CompoBell that Denny's got to pour with downstairs. We'll find out how it's working, but it's got to be 6 or 7 years old. So we'll see when he goes to pour something here again, how that 6 or 7 year old CompoBell is pouring. But I'm hoping Becky gets some made soon after she gets the porcelain made, because I need CompoBell again desperately. I think I have a couple gallons left downstairs, so we're not drastic. My porcelain is down to less than half a gallon. So if they're not going to get any made here shortly, I'm going to have to break down and order some from New York Dynamic Porcelain. And it's okay stuff, but I do not like it anywhere near as well as I like Bell. Okay, so I think, oh, one thing I did want to bring up is, like, if you have a flaw in your composition piece, you know, with porcelain, you can fill it back in with, you know, the powder and all of that, and, you know, try and work on an air bubble or something that way. With the CompoBell, you have to clean it and then go in and fill it with that little jar of stuff I have over there, which I think is a wood filler. And then you fill it in, then sand it off, and then you spray paint the body. So you can patch little imperfections if you need to. You don't have to pour a whole new piece. And if you get a crack in it for some reason, like some type of a small crack, you can fill it in with the wood putty. I think it's wood putty. I don't think it's water putty. I think it's wood putty. It's not Durham's water putty that I set hooks with. This is a wood putty, I think. You can fill it in with that, sand it off with sandpaper, and then spray over it. And as long as you did a good job of the filling and the sanding, it will look just fine. Okay, this one I don't think had any major like air bubbles on me or anything that I have to fill in. So this one actually looks pretty good. Okay, so it is time to clean it off and see what it looks like. Okay, so I'm going to throw that in there. So I'm going to start cleaning off, you know, and removing the film with my sponge. And then I'm eventually going to have to wipe my hand off here because I've got a lot of this paste on my hand. Okay, see, I've got all this stuff on my hand, so I'm going to rinse that off, wipe my hand off. Then I'm going to flip this body over and try and get the paste cleaned off of there a little bit better. So just keep rinsing in the jug when you need to. Yes, Melissa, I'm assuming that's you, Melissa. These bodies I've had poured for years, just sitting in tubs here waiting to be worked on. And this stuff's just like he had poured it yesterday. I'm not sure what the shelf life is on the actual liquid compo, but once the pieces are poured, like I say, these pieces are probably 7 to 8 years old, and they're not any different than what they were when we put them in the container. Okay, so I'm just trying to get this paste off of here. And then I'm eventually going to clean my hand off again and wipe it off with the towel. Okay. Turn it over on its side. Okay, now there is one air bubble down here right in the crotch, right there, which after it dries and that, you could fix with that wood putty, I think it is. Or, because of the location of it, when this body is put together and the upper legs come out of there, it's right there. You're really never going to see anything. But if you want it to be perfect, you can fill it in with the wood putty, whatever putty it is over there, and fill it in, sand it off, and then you'd never know it was there. Okay, I've about got all of the stuff off of here. And my hand's pretty clean. So now I'm just going to find a clean spot on my towel. Wipe this off. Okay. This looks pretty good. I think my hands are clean, so I'm not putting the paste all back over it. But here is the torso done. And so the only flaw I really see in this one is there's just a little tiny hole right there. And then, I mean, there's a little tiny minute one right here, but it makes no difference whatsoever in the looks of this body. So that is done. Okay, that is basically how it is done.